Good morning, friends. I'm Michael Airgood, the pastor of the churches of the Resurrection Circuit, Clareton First, Glassport, and Pine Run United Methodist Churches. Thank you for joining us today. So I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about kosher laws. And so I'm going to have you take some guesses. I'm going to read the name of an animal, something that can be eaten. And if you think that under the Old Testament, Hebrew Bible, Jewish law, it was clean, I want you to put your hand over your heart. And if you think it was unclean, I want you to make an X, okay? I know this is asking a lot. So let's start off with a goat. Is it clean or unclean? It is clean. What about a rabbit? A rabbit, clean or unclean? A rabbit is actually unclean. Unclean. What about a crocodile? Clean or unclean? Unclean. What about albacore? I think that'd be tuna, right? Clean or unclean? Clean. What about anchovies? The little fish that people with problems get on pizza? Clean or unclean? Anchovies are clean. What about something like crab? Would crab be clean or would it be unclean? Crab is unclean. Unclean. Dolphin. Would dolphin be clean or unclean? Unclean. Thankfully, no one's going to eat dolphin. What about crickets? Clean or unclean? Crickets and locust are the only clean insects. So we read this list, and it's kind of a little bit silly. Kangaroos are unclean. I don't think that was of much help to any Jewish people thousands of years ago. Woodpeckers are also unclean, so resist the temptation. What's kosher and what's not, and what do we mean by clean and unclean? I think it's really clear, and I want to start off by saying this, that the Pharisees, when they talked about things being clean and unclean, they started to get this impression of what's good for you, what's bad for you, and I think that we take it this way too often. But really what these laws meant for the folks in the Jewish religion was what makes you clean, able to worship God, or unclean, needing to be ritualistically purified. But I want you to know that the commitment to kosher law is real and can be very intense. Jesus' disciples would have grown up in an environment where they would have known the answer to all of these questions, other than perhaps woodpeckers, which I'm not sure that they have in that part of the world. When I was living in Korea, a job opportunity came up that I really thought about applying for, of a Jewish family who worked at the embassy that was looking for a kosher chef. And they were willing to pay a tremendous amount of money just to have someone who would take their religion seriously. It would have been nearly impossible. A lot of foods in Korea are processed in the same facilities that process unclean foods. And even in college, once I visited the home of one of my Jewish friends, and her father kept a kosher kitchen. And, we came in, and the first day he said, "You kids, you eat whatever you want. I'll have them come and clean it all." And I remember reading when I was in Korea, all of the qualifications of how to clean a kitchen to make it kosher. And you have to take everything out, wash everything separately, and then bring everything back in. He went through a tremendous amount of work to let us make our cheeseburgers that we wanted to eat that week. Jesus makes an odd statement when he says that it's not what goes into your body that makes you unclean, it's what comes out of the body. This is an odd statement because it flies in the face of everything that Jewish people had been taught and had believed and had practiced for centuries. Now, Jesus' disciples, they would have grown up learning this, but I think it's probably safe to say that their families would have practiced a little bit of a modified version, because it really takes a tremendous amount of work. And what we found is that families that can afford servants and chefs and things like this, they have an easier time keeping to the very strict standards. But everyone tries their best to do what they can to maintain the tenets of their religion. So it's also weird that Jesus said that what you put in your body is not what makes you unclean, because we know for a fact that what we put into our bodies can defile our bodies. A steady diet of McDonald's and Twinkies and vodka shots will eventually kill you. So it seems a little strange when it appears that Jesus says, eat whatever you want. And then when he adds on, any plant that my Father didn't plant will be uprooted, that also can be used in some strange ways and has been by some sects of the religion. A steady diet, we know, of trash TV and pornography and listening to music with violent lyrics, we know that it has an effect on our brains. We know that what we consume shapes who we are. We are what we eat. We know this. We know this. So what do we do with a teaching like this that flies in the face of everything we've been taught? So we have to understand the context, that this is in a direct response to the Pharisees. Jesus and his disciples have been invited to the home of a Pharisee, and the Pharisees have had a problem with everything Jesus has said. And they come in and they don't do the ceremonial hand washing. And this is strange because in every other story in the Bible, it is the host who is responsible to make sure that the ceremonial hand washing is provided. And yet the host chastises Jesus and his followers for not having done that. I think there's some weirdness going on there. But they start eating without doing the ceremonial washing. And the disciples, they have a reputation for not following all of the laws. Even there's another story where it's the Sabbath and they're picking wheat right off the stalk and eating it there. And people are saying, how can you let your disciples do work on the Sabbath? The Pharisees, they are always looking for a gotcha moment. Aha, you're a hypocrite just like us. We finally caught him. But I think that Jesus is calling us to think a little bigger. Jewish kosher laws were written to protect a people. It protects the individual, but it protects the people. But it had been interpreted in a very individualistic way, in a way that made it so the wealthiest could follow every detail and the poor struggled and found themselves consistently unclean and unable to worship God in the ways they were taught to worship God. Jesus makes it clear. We eat something, it passes through us, it's out the sewer. But what comes out, our words, our actions, those have a lasting impact on the people around us. What a person puts into their body doesn't defile the body, doesn't prevent us from worshiping God, because the body is larger than any one person. Paul writes about the body of Christ. It is a group. It is not about us as individuals. The reality is we can always worship God. Jesus teaches that there is no such thing as being unclean, that we can't approach God. That's not who God is. Through the sacrifice of Jesus, we are all made clean, that we can all approach God and worship. For Jesus, we are always a collective. It's not about us as individuals. We are the body of Christ. The folks Jesus is talking to, the Pharisees, they have spent their careers spewing hate and denigrating the poor, making it seem as though people who are poor are somehow away from God, are outside of God's will, and this is not the reality. They are focused on the external appearance and not the heart of it. Jesus says, you are like a cup that has been washed on the outside, but the inside is just full of gross decay. The people Jesus is speaking with have spent so much time focusing on what goes into the body that they have neglected to think about what comes out of the body, how their words have caused harm to the larger body, the community God has placed them in. You know, I wear this little strip of fabric everywhere I go these days. And it's a little odd because it appears that the scientific community agrees that this mask, especially one that's not a N95 professional mask, this mask does very little to protect me from getting coronavirus. The number that I've heard is about 30% protection. But if I have coronavirus, whether I know it or not, and I'm wearing this little strip of fabric, it does a tremendous job at keeping those around me safe. We don't wear this to protect ourselves as much as we wear it to protect others. If we are thinking only of ourselves and our protection, then a mask is just an annoyance with little benefit. But if we are thinking about the community, about others, the people we interact with, then suddenly a mask becomes essential. We share our hearts with one another. And I agree that it is good to pay attention to what we consume, to make choices that lead to spiritual health and well-being. Drink more water, eat a vegetable, turn off the TV, and go for a walk. We know that simply listing out loud our joys and what we are grateful for every day improves our mental health. It builds new pathways between neurotransmitters. Just simply speaking our joys heals our brains. So do the things that lead to health for yourself. But more importantly, do the things that lead to healthy communities. Speak joys into the abyss of darkness. Criticize only that which can be changed, and only that in which change will bring benefit to the least of these. Jesus taught us to break the rules to help others, not to think of ourselves first, but to first think of others. It's not what we eat that makes us unclean and unable to worship God. It's what we say and what we do when we belittle and put down and when we ignore the reality of the community that God has placed us in. Jesus encourages and teaches us to break the rules to help others.